Chapter 6, Colombia and Peru. Completing about the end of April, and the observations they proposed to make at the northern extremity at the torrid zone, Humboldt and Bonpland were on the point of proceeding to Vera Cruz with the squadron of an Admiral Aritzabal, but being misled by false intelligence respecting the expedition of Captain Bodwin, they were induced to relinquish the project of passing through Mexico on their way to the Philippine Islands. The public journals announced that two French sloops, the Geographe and the Naturaliste, had sailed for Cape Horn, and that they were to proceed along the coasts of Chile and Peru, and thence to New Holland. The intelligence revived in Humboldt's mind all the projects he had formed during his stay in Paris, when he solicited the Directory to hasten the departure of Captain Bodwin. The travelers at once set to work and divided their precious herbals into 3 portions to avoid exposing to the risks of a long voyage the objects they had obtained with so much difficulty on the banks of Orinoco, the Atabapo, and the Rio Negro. They sent one collection by way of England to Germany, another by way of Cadiz to France, and a third remained at Havana. They had reason to congratulate themselves on this foresight. Each collection contained nearly the same species, and no precautions were neglected to have the cases, if taken by English or French vessels, remitted to the Sir Joseph Banks or to the professors of natural history at the Museum of Paris. It happened, fortunately, that the manuscripts which Humboldt at first intended to send with the collection to Cadiz were not entrusted to Fray Juan Gonzalez, who would have followed them to Havana with the view of returning to Spain. He left the island of Cuba soon after the travelers, but the vessel in which he sailed foundered on the coast of Africa, and the cargo and crew were all lost. By this event, the travelers lost some of the duplicates of their herbals, and what was more important, all the insects which Bonpland had with great difficulty collected during their voyage to the Orinoco and the Rio Negro. The collections shipped, the travelers ascended the Rio Magdalena. Bonpland, as was his wont, exploring the botanical treasures of the shore, and Humboldt making a chart of the river district. The sky was cloudy, but the nights were tropically fine. Their old torments, the mosquitoes, followed them. By and by they passed the little city of Monpex. With its white house and its red roofs, they saw the inhabitants chatting before the doors of their dwelling. It was evening at the time, and meeting the darkening streets, in addition to the plague of mosquitoes which kept them most of the day in their hammocks, the inhabitants of Monpex were horribly disfigured with goiters. Their city was surrounded with swamps and was liable to inundations. Sometimes they were obliged to desert their houses and take to their canoes. Crocodiles came up to the banks to feed on the offal thrown from the city. From Monpex to Santa Margarita, the shore was bordered with orange and lemon trees. At Pinon, they saw the mountains in their interior, the depths of the water increasing along the shore. They were now and then obliged to lay in the poles and haul along by the trees. They passed the island of Morales, which were shaded with cocoa palms. Beyond Badillo, the crocodiles diminished, and cocoa plantations began. Sometimes the river, broadening, resembled a large lake, bordered with forest trees. At such places, the travelers saw their old friends of Cumana in the Orinoco, flamingos, herons, parrots, and macaws, and hordes of howling monkeys. Turtles were plentiful, as were also crocodiles and jaguars. They saw the crocodiles and jaguars fighting on the banks as they passed. At last they reached the town of Honda, having been 35 days on the river. From Honda, they proceeded on mules to Bogota. The road was more like the bed of a torrent than a road. They descended from the mountains of Sarieto into the picturesque valley of Guandas. Then they climbed the steep sides of Alta del Trigo and again descended to the plain of Villetias. From the Paramo of Serradra, they saw the plains of Bogota. Though they were still 9 leagues from the capital, at last they came in sight of the white towers of the cathedral and the monasteries of Montserrat and Guadalupe. The travelers arrived at Bogota in June and remained till September, pursuing their botanical and geographical researches and making excursions to the natural curiosities of the neighborhood. The plain of Bogota was encircled with lofty mountains, and the perfect level of the soil, its geological structure, the form of the rocks of Suba and the Facativia, which rose like small islands in the midst of savannah, all served to indicate the existence of an ancient lake, the Rio Funzua, into which flowed the waters of the valley, forced its way through the mountains to the southwest of Bogota. Near the farm of Canoas, this river rushed from the plain by a narrow outlet into a crevice, which descended towards the basin of the Rio Magdalena. Here were the celebrated falls of Tequendama. Taking one pleasant day, the road which led to the falls, the travelers passed the village of Suacha and the great farm of Canoas, famous for its crop was wheat. At a small distance from the farm, on the heights of Chipa, they found themselves surrounded with oaks and elms and plants which recalled to their minds the vegetation of Europe. Looking down as from a terrace, they discovered below from a country producing bananas and sugar canes. They descended from a dangerous path to the brink of the precipice into which the river threw itself. At a short distance above them, it was 120 feet broad, but as it drew near the fall, it contradicted itself in a deep but narrow bed, scarcely 40 feet wide, and plunged at 2 bounds down at a perpendicular rock to the depth of 650 feet. It came on like a broad arch of glass. As soon as it was over the brink of the precipice, it became a fleece of spray, which the brink was changed to in its descent to mist. The mist rose, however, to a considerable height, and was crowned with glittering rainbows. And the rocky sides of the crevice, hung with shrubs and bushes, gushed innumerable springs and tributary streams, and over and around all darted strange birds, with beautiful plumage. A great portion of the fall was lost in vapor. What little was left below, a dwindled streamlet rushed impetuously along a stony bed overhung with trees and was lost in the dark windings of the rock. The crevice into which the river plunged, communicating with the plains of the warm regions. A few palm trees had sprung up at the foot of the cataract. This led the inhabitants of Bogota to say that the river plunged from a hot into a cold country. Humboldt succeeded, not without danger, in carrying his instruments into the crevice. It took him 3 hours to reach the bottom of it by a narrow path. A few feeble rays of noon fell on the bottom of the crevice. The solitude of the place, the richness of the vegetation, and the dreadful roar that struck him upon the ear were long remembered by him. He considered it one of the wildest scenes in the whole range of the Cordilleras. The column of vapor rising from a thick cloud from the falls could be seen from the walks around Bogota at 5 leagues distance. There was a legend connected with the place. In the remotest times, it ran, before the moon accompanied the earth, the inhabitants of the plain of Bogota lived like barbarians, naked, without agriculture, without any form of laws or worship. Suddenly there appeared among them an old man who came from the plains situated on the east of the Cordillera of Chingaswa, and who appeared to be of a race unlike that of the natives, having a long and bushy beard. He was known by 3 distinct appellations: Bochia, Nemquithbaba, and Zue. This old man instructed men how to clothe themselves, build huts, till the ground, and form themselves into communities. He brought with him a woman to whom also tradition gives 3 names: Chia, Yube Kwagiara, and Huitheka. This woman, extremely beautiful and not less malignant, thwarted every enterprise of her husband for the happiness of mankind. By her skill in magic, she swelled the Rio Fuanzua and inundated the valley of Bogota. The greater part of the inhabitants perished in this deluge. A few only found refuge on the summits of the neighboring mountains. The old man in anger drove the beautiful Huitheka from the earth, and she became the moon, which began from that epoch to enlighten our planet during the night. Bochica, moved with compassion for those who were dispersed over the mountains, broke with his powerful arm the rocks that enclosed the valley on the side of the canoas and Quadama. By this outlet, he drained the waters of the Lake of Bogota. He built towns, introduced the worship of the sun, named 2 chiefs, between whom he divided the civil and ecclesiastical authority, and then withdrew himself under the name of Idaha Kansas into a holy valley of Araka, near Tuanja, where he lived in the exercise of the most austere penitence for the space of 2,000 years. After the excursion to the falls of Tequadama, the travelers visited the lake of Guatavia. It was situated at the north of Bogota, in a wild and solitary spot on a ridge of the mountains of Zipaguara. At a height of 8,500 feet, it was held in veneration by the Indians in olden times, who were supposed to have repaired Tithir for the purpose of abolition and purification. The travelers found the remains of a flight of steps, to which the Indians were accustomed to descend to the water, and a channel by which the Spaniards, after the conquest, had attempted to drain the lake, to recover the treasures which were said to have been concealed there when the Quesada and his cavalry appeared on the plains of Cuantimaraca. It lay on a plain surrounded by mountains. Its basin was a short of half oval, whose stony sloping sides were overgrown with bushes and trees.